So the Las Vegas Raiders have officially named quarterback Aidan O'Connell the starting quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders from this point forward. Plus, Antonio Pierce was also asked about Davante Adams, and he almost implied that Davante Adams is not only still a Raider, but he can actually play for the Las Vegas Raiders as soon as he's healthy. We'll get into what he said a little bit later on, but first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about Aidan O'Connell. So the Raiders have officially named Aidan O'Connell the starting quarterback going into this Pittsburgh Steelers game. And I think this is a very, very good change that the Raiders need at this point. You know, I've been on team Gardner Minshew up to this point, and I felt like Minshew definitely has done a good job, but as we talked about it in yesterday's video, he's just too inconsistent. Gardner Minshew at this point is way too inconsistent, and you just can't win with that style of football. And the thing is a lot of us do think that Luke Getsy's the bigger issue with the Las Vegas Raiders, but I do think being able to see a different quarterback, a fresh quarterback in there, and Aidan O'Connell will be good for the Las Vegas Raiders. Plus, I think there's also a chance that this could fire up the group, right? This could bring back momentum as the Raiders kind of go forward. We play a Pittsburgh Steelers team that, although they do have a really, really good defense, it's a beatable team, right? It's a defense that's banged up. It's a defense that's missing two of its best defensive linemen. It's a team that the Raiders can definitely beat, especially because on the offensive side, their quarterback's kind of unproven at this point. We don't really know if Justin Fields is even a good quarterback. Now, there's a chance that Russell Wilson ends up starting, or at least playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see if that actually ends up happening. But this is a winnable game, and I think for the Raiders, being able to go into this game with some momentum would be a huge thing for the Las Vegas Raiders to actually have. So Aidan O'Connell will end up starting for the Raiders. Also, let's just talk about some of what we have seen from O'Connell that I think should allow the Raiders to have more success on the offensive side. You know, one of the things you can't argue about with Aidan O'Connell is the arm talent, right? I've stated this in the past, and I'll state it again. From a pure passing perspective, Aidan O'Connell is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He has one of the best arms in the NFL. That doesn't mean he's the fastest, the quickest, he reads coverage the best. I'm talking about from a pure perspective of his arm talent, right? If there's a guy right in front of Jacoby Myers, Aidan O'Connell is the type of quarterback that can put it right over that defender's head and hit Jacoby Myers on the sideline. Aidan O'Connell is the type of guy, if Trey Tucker runs 30, 40 yards and he cuts outwards to the corner, Aidan O'Connell will put the ball exactly where it needs to go. Aidan O'Connell has a phenomenal arm, right? And we know for a fact his arm is a lot better than Gardner Minshew. And I think one of the big issues with the Raiders over the past couple of weeks is just ball placement. It's been an issue with Gardner Minshew. And this week, we're going to actually get Aidan O'Connell in there, who has a pretty decent arm. So it's going to be an interesting game. Now, I will say this. I think the offensive line has to do their part. I felt like we had some success over the past couple of games on the offensive line. I do think last week they regressed a little bit. I felt like, there was a lot more pressure on the quarterback this past week. So going into this next game, the offensive line has to be able to hold up. Now, TJ Watt is one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, and he lines up over DJ Glaze, and he primarily plays that side, right? TJ Watt's mainly a left defensive end lined up over the right tackle. So the Raiders are going to have to chip. They're going to have to double team. They're going to have to make sure that DJ Glaze does not end up being the one guy that kind of loses this game for the Raiders. TJ Watt's going to get after it, right? We know that he's a very, very hard player to stop. So DJ Glaze is going to have to get out there and not only have his best game of the season, but we need to make sure we're chipping. Playing Myles Garrett in the Cleveland Browns just 2 weeks ago, one of the things that never made sense to me was why Myles Garrett had multiple one-on-one opportunities. It didn't make sense to me. Now, I have my theory that Luke Getsy calls plays just to call them, right? He doesn't actually think things through, right? Like, if you call a play that has chip help, he'll let that chip help go towards the right tackle and leave Myles Garrett in a one-on-one with Colt Miller. We can't have that. We need to make sure we're chipping on TJ Watt on every single play. We got to give TJ Watt the essentially the type of game that Maxx Crosby had where against the Chargers, where Harbaugh came in and said, we're going to chip, we're going to help Joe Watt on every single play. We got to give that type of treatment to TJ Watt. And we got to keep Aidan O'Connell clean. I think if we keep him clean, I think he'll be able to get the ball out. Now, last week, he obviously did have a couple of drives that he played in. He led the third drive downfield and scored a touchdown on it. Interestingly, that drive ended up on the 1 yard line, right? We're on the backs against the wall, 1 yard line, and this guy from that point was able to drive all the way downfield and put together a really, really nice drive. He also had a nice drive against the Panthers. I know some people are going to say, those two teams had blown us at that point. They're trying to just, play the prevent style of defense, get off the field, go home. But I still think that some of what we saw in those drives was that this guy does have a good arm, right? And the hope is that if the offensive line can keep Aidan O'Connell clean, we'll be able to potentially win this game and have success on the offensive side. So I'm excited for this, man. I really, really, really am excited for this. I hope Aidan O'Connell is able to have success for the Raiders, and I hope we're able to beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, man. This is a winnable game. I also do think that one of the things the Raiders are going to have to do on the offensive side, other than protect Aidan O'Connell, is they're going to have to run the football and have success running the football. Alexander Mattison ended up getting the start this past week. He had 15 carries. He averaged 2.5 yards per attempt. That's not acceptable. So the Raiders got to be able to clean it up when it comes to that aspect of things. Plus, it's crazy to me to think this, but Antonio Pierce was asked about Davante Adams, and I just want you guys to check out what he had to say.
On the Davante Adams situation, and how quickly do you want to get a resolution to this so you can kind of move on?
Well, the update, Davante's doing well. Hamstring's getting there. He's getting closer and closer to get back on the field, on the practice field, and good spirits. We talked, so everything's good.
Do you see any scenario where he can return to the Raiders?
He's still a Raider. He's never not been a Raider.
Yeah, actually playing a game for the Raiders.
He's still a Raider. When he's healthy and he can play, we'll play him. He's just not healthy right now. And he's getting closer, though. That's the good part. He's working every day to get that hamstrings right. He's in the right headspace mentally. Like I said, we talked recently and had a good conversation, and he's ready to play football.
Has he been rehabbing here at the facility, Antonio?
Yes.
Have you seen him here? Yeah.
So when Antonio Pierce was asked about Davante Adams, right away you can see that Antonio Pierce was smiling. He had, a type of, he answered the question in a type of way where you kind of think to yourself, is Davante Adams still potentially going to be with the Las Vegas Raiders? Antonio Pierce says Davante Adams is in good spirits. He's getting healthier. He said he is still a Raider, essentially, right? He's never not been a Raider. And when he gets healthy, he'll essentially be back with the Raiders. And he'll essentially be able to practice. He'll essentially be able to get out there and potentially play for the Raiders. And I find it interesting that that's how Antonio Pierce answered the question. Now, I'm going to give you guys my thoughts here in a second. But just the fact that Antonio Pierce put that out there is kind of interesting in his own right. We heard Jay Glazer's report yesterday. We had heard from Davante Adams himself on the K Adams podcast. We've seen everything that's kind of led up to this point, and it's almost like this entire situation just wasn't handled properly. It's almost like the Raiders should have potentially moved off of Davante Adams sooner rather than later. And I almost feel like the Raiders are now at a point where we're not sure if a team's even interested in potentially giving the Raiders what they want. But there's also a potential chance that Davante Adams really only wanted to be with the Jets. And after the Robert Saleh firing, there's also a chance Davante Adams had a change of heart. Right? There's a realistic chance Antonio Pierce actually did speak to Davante yesterday. Right? And there's a realistic chance Davante told Antonio Pierce, hey, if the Jets aren't willing to take on my contract, or maybe Tom Telesco's already told Davante that, hey, like, they'll take you, but you got to restructure your contract. You're going to lose $30-40 million going over there. Maybe there's a chance Davante Adams changed his mind and looks at it like, I'd rather play for the Raiders at this point. Plus, what if Aidan O'Connell goes out against the Pittsburgh Steelers and has a really, really good game, and Davante says, I want to end my career with that, right? You never know, right? There's a lot that could potentially be happening, but just the fact that Antonio Pierce is saying that Davante Adams is still a Raider, it's interesting as hell, man. It's very, very, very interesting. But I'll also give you guys my honest thoughts. I think Antonio Pierce was coached on to say essentially what he's saying. I think there's also a chance that, the Raiders want to get the most they can out of Davante Adams. I do think Antonio Pierce and Davante Adams have probably talked, and they probably come to a conclusion on whatever that is. But I still think that if Adam Schefter, if Ian Rappaport, these guys are putting it out there that Davante Adams has requested a trade, to me, that means that the Raiders are going to trade this guy, right? Those guys wouldn't put it out unless it was 100% confirmed. So to me, I think there's a realistic chance that Antonio Pierce putting this information out there is to make other teams feel like, hey, maybe the Raiders will just end up keeping Davante. Maybe there's a real chance, if Tom Telesco talks to John Lynch, the 49ers general manager, or Ryan Poles, the Chicago Bears general manager, right? If Tom Telesco talks to these guys and these guys are telling him that we'll only give you a 5th round pick, Tom Telesco could easily respond saying, hey, like, we're not 100% even, willing to trade Davante. Like, Davante's hurt. He has the hamstring injury. When he's back, we'll just keep him, right? We don't really mind not keeping him, right? And there's a chance that Antonio Pierce is also just trying to put that same information out there that if Davante's healthy, he'll end up playing for us, right? So there's a chance that this is essentially being used as leverage where a team might feel like, hey, well, if Davante does end up just staying with the Raiders, if he is healthy, he is good to go, well, we want him, so we might be willing to pay a little bit more, right? I don't personally think Davante Adams will ever play for the Las Vegas Raiders again. From what I know, right, and this could not be, this could be false 100%. I'm not saying this is the truth. From my understanding, Davante Adams quit on the Las Vegas Raiders, right? When Antonio Pierce called him out, from my understanding, he quit at that point. And the hamstring injury, I'm not saying it's fake, right? Because Maxx Crosby's mentioned that he has a real injury. Antonio Pierce at this point has mentioned he has a real injury. We've had reporters, right, like Ian Rappaport and Adam Schefter report that he has a real hamstring injury. I just feel like it was a very convenient injury that came up for him. It's kind of like what happened back in preseason when Antonio Pierce and Davante Adams disagreed with playing in the preseason. Davante said, I'm not playing. Antonio said, you'll play if you're healthy. And out of nowhere, Davante has a hamstring injury, whatever it was back then, which allowed him not to ultimately play in the preseason. So we'll see what ends up happening. I think the Raiders should still trade Davante Adams. In my personal opinion, I think they should still trade him. Even if he wants to stay, I still feel like that contract long-term just doesn't make sense for the Raiders. Also, I think Davante Adams has started to regress a little bit, right? I actually do think that. And I thought that even before the entire trade thing had happened. He's had multiple drops. He's not separating the way he once did, and he just doesn't look the same, in my opinion. And of course, he's 32 years old, right? We got to consider all that. Finally, let's talk a little bit about something that Antonio Pierce said when it came to Christian Wilkins. This is also kind of an updated timeline as well. Antonio Pierce said that Christian Wilkins was in the building today at 6 a.m. this morning trying to get ready. He was talking about he'll be back in a couple of weeks. So Wilkins is on the injured reserve, so he'll have to miss at least 4 weeks. But according to Antonio Pierce, I mean, this guy's came in with high spirits. This guy's come in. He's going to start rehab process as soon as he's, technically allowed to. Remember, he had surgery yesterday, so it's already crazy. This guy's already at the hospital. He's already back in the building at 6 a.m. He's already getting the work in. To me, that's crazy altogether, right? But that's the type of player Christian Wilkins is, right? He's one of those guys that wants to play. He's a guy that wants to get out there. He's a guy that wants his presence to be known. And more than that, he's a leader. And I think what he's kind of showing us right now is that he's definitely a leader. Regardless of him having a foot injury, he can take the next 2-3 weeks off. Like, he doesn't have to come into the building. He can literally tell the Las Vegas Raiders, I just had surgery. I'm going to stay home for the next 3-4 weeks. I'm going to recover. I'm going to relax. I'm going to play video games like we see a lot of players doing in the NFL nowadays. Wilkins does not take that approach, man. This guy wants to be in the building. He wants to make sure that he's still prepping for this next team. He wants to make sure that the other defensive linemen are also getting ready for this game as well. He wants to make sure Tyree Wilson and Adam Butler and John Jenkins also know their assignments. And, hey, I watched tape on, the Isaac Samalo, the left guard of the Pittsburgh Steelers, or the rookie Mason McCormick, the right guard of the Steelers. I watched the tape of these guys. Here's what they're doing, or whatever it is, right? This guy is one of those guys that I absolutely respect so much. And I'm so happy that the Raiders brought him in. Again, he'll miss at least 4 weeks because of that injury. Week 5 or 5 weeks from now, right? He might actually end up being back. Although some people think it could take up to 6 months for this injury to heal. This guy's an athlete. He's a professional athlete. Genetically, he's different than like the average person. So I don't think 6 months is going to be the timeline for Wilkins. 1 month might be a little bit too quick, but we'll see what ends up happening. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think about Aidan O'Connell taking over the job. Let me know what you guys think about Davante Adams. Do you guys think Davante could actually come back to the Las Vegas Raiders? I should also throw this out there. Some people are saying that Adam Butler was the guy that caused the injury to Christian Wilkins. I've heard otherwise, right? That it was not actually Adam Butler that caused that injury. But don't quote that as being true. When I say I was told, is one source that's telling me this, right? Now, it is a source that I trust, right? So it's not like random people that are telling me, but it wasn't Adam Butler that caused the injury to Christian Wilkins. So for whatever that's worth, I want to just throw that out there. Let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe. Make sure you drop a comment down below, and I will see you guys next time with another video.